Hey everyone, my name is Kevin, and in this video, we're going to create this 2D and 3D animated star scene in Blender with some modeling, grease pencil, and geometry nodes. This tutorial is inspired by my Dream Type video and the Mario Galaxy video that I made a few months back, so if you'd like to reference those, I'll leave links in the description below. This can be done without a tablet, and it's open to anyone who wants to follow along, but it will be a little bit quicker than my first tutorial, so if you'd like something more in depth, you can check out my flower-based tutorial, and I'll leave a link in the description as well. Lastly, I'm still learning about these new features in Blender, so if there's something I've missed or there's a more efficient way to do something, feel free to leave a comment. Alright, so this tutorial was originally planned as one video, but I'm going to be splitting it up into two parts, with this being part 1. Part 1 will cover modeling, shading, and grease pencil elements, and part 2 will cover geometry nodes, other background elements, and exporting. To do this tutorial, you're going to want to make sure you have the most recent version of Blender 2.93 because we'll be using the new features. And also, I'm going to have screencast keys here on the bottom left. If you see OS key pressed, just know that that's actually the command key on Mac, and it's interchangeable with the control key for any shortcut that we'll be using. So the first thing we'll want to do is model a star. Delete the cube by pressing X, delete, and then let's bring in a circle by hitting Shift A, Mesh, and then Circle. Down here in Vertices, let's type 10 and then click in the viewport. Then select the circle and tab into Edit mode. Make sure you're in Vertex Select mode with 1 if you're not already, then hold down Shift and then select every other vertex point. Then S to scale it in, and then make some sort of a star shape. Select all the vertices with A and then press F to fill the mesh in. Then hit E to extrude it upward, and then it'll automatically constrain to the Z. So bring it up to about here. Enter face select mode with 3, and then select the top and the bottom faces of the star mesh. Let's inset these faces with I to about here, and then with the faces selected, press S and then Z to scale them outward in the Z. It should make this thick bevel looking shape. So tab into object mode and let's apply a subdivision surface modifier. You can access that in tools, or you can hit Control plus the number of levels that you want. So in this case, 3 is good for this. Then with the object selected, tab into edit mode and then make sure everything is deselected. We're going to add cuts along the sides of our mesh and then slide them to the left edge. This is going to give the star a little bit more definition. Let's hit Ctrl R to add a loop cut, then we're going to slide it to the left edge like this, and then click to confirm. We're going to do that for all the sides of the star. If it helps, feel free to enter X-ray mode. Once you're done, your star should look like this. Next, let's set up the camera for our scene. I find it's pretty helpful to set this up early on to get an idea for how we want the scene to look. So hit numpad 1 to go into front view, and then align the camera to this view with Alt-Control numpad 0. Or you can go to the view at the top here, go to Align View, and then Align Active Camera to View. Let's go into the animation workspace at the top and then set the left viewport to the camera view, and then you can use the right viewport to adjust as needed. To do this, we'll just grab the camera object with G and then move it however we'd like. You can either bring it closer or further or rotate it. Just be mindful that later on in the tutorial, we'll be animating it a little bit. In object mode, let's actually select the star and then rotate it in the Y by 35 degrees so that it's sitting upright. So the next thing we'll do is shading, both the background and the mesh. But before we do this, we're going to go to our rendered properties, go to color management to set the option here to standard so the colors are more accurate. Let's go into the shading workspace up here and enter rendered preview mode, and we'll start with the background. We're going to create some sort of a vertical soft gradient just like in the example. So click on world in the drop down here, and then we'll see we have a background node connected to a world output node. Using Shift A, let's bring in a color ramp and then a gradient texture node. Then we'll want to add a mapping and texture coordinate node. If you have Node Wrangler installed, you can use Ctrl-T to do that as well. Just make sure that the texture coordinate camera output is connected to the mapping vector input and reflects this same setup. Going back to our background node here, we want to control the strength the background has on our object. So let's duplicate this background node with Shift-D and then we'll place it underneath. Then let's mix the two background nodes with Shift-Control and then right-click dragging between them and connect the color ramp to the new background. If we adjust either strength, the two nodes now both affect the background. Let's bring in a light path node and connect camera array to the mix shader factor. So now the strengths of the two nodes affect the background and the object separately. Let's keep the top background strength to around 1.2 and then the bottom strength at 1. So now we'll want to orient the gradient in the right direction. Let's go to the mapping node and then change the X rotation value to -30 and the Z rotation value to -90. This makes it vertical. Let's adjust the color ramp to where these points are a bit closer. Also, the gradient is a bit harsh, so let's change this to B-spline. So in the original piece, I had a background that went from pink to dark blue. You can do the same thing, but feel free to pick any colors that you'd like. I'm going to make this one pink, this one a dark blue, and then I'm going to add points in between them to create a smooth gradient background. After some adjusting, we have our background shaded. Let's move on to our star mesh. Select the star and change the drop-down here from World to Object. Then select New. We're going to create a simple toon shader for our mesh. Let's bring in a shader to RGB node and then a color ramp node and change linear to constant. In moving the handles, you can see the color coverage move over the mesh. So you can theoretically keep this setup and then change these colors to whatever you want, add more colors, etc. But I like to have a little bit more control over this, and it'll be important to separate out these color channels for later on in the tutorial. Let's add in a separate RGB node before our color ramp. Then bring in a mix RGB and then plug the color ramp into the factor of it. Choose colors for now to see what we're working with. We're going to change these later. Now select the color ramp and mix RGB nodes and then duplicate them 2 times with Shift-D and then plug the G from separate RGB into the middle color ramp and then B into the last color ramp. Then connect the middle mix RGB to the first one and the last mix RGB to the middle one. So your setup should look like this. Now let's pick random colors for all of our color choices and then adjust our color ramps to get the color coverage that we want. Now we can start changing the colors to the ones we do actually want. So here I'm going to make the dark shades blue and then the light shades a lighter yellow. And then I'll make some color ramp adjustments. And so now we have our star shaded. So the next thing to do is to draw a face. So we're going to place the 3D cursor here on the front of the star with Shift right click. And then we're going to Shift A and add in a new grease pencil blank. Let's move over to the 2D animation workspace up here and then let's adjust some of the viewport options. By the way, if you have a grease pencil object selected, going into the 2D animation workspace will automatically put you into draw mode. So go up to the overlays drop down here, toggle 3D cursor and then canvas. Make sure we're in material preview mode for now. Over here in the center, set these options to 3D cursor and then the drawing plane to front. Go into the Material Properties tab and let's create 3 new materials. The first one will be stroke and I'll name that layer accordingly. We're going to make it a dark blue. The second one is going to be a fill, name it fill, and we're going to make it the same color. You can actually copy the color from the stroke by hovering over the color box and then pasting it into the fill of the other material. The third material will just be a white fill. Then let's go to our layers, create 2 new ones, and then name them eyes and mouth respectively. Make sure that use lights are turned off for both. Before we draw, we want to check a few more things. Let's go up here and then make sure that strength is 1. Also, toggle off pressure sensitivity for both the strength and the radius, and make sure that your timeline playhead is set to 0. Select the circle tool on the left and then the fill color material from up here. Hover in your viewport and hit Y to make sure that we're on the eyes layer. I'm entering front view with numpad 1 to see easier, and now we can draw our eyes. Also, when in draw mode, Blender has this white overlay when drawing. It might make it a little bit difficult to see, but you can toggle that off by unchecking overlays here. So I'm going to draw some vertical ovals for the eyes, but feel free to make any shape that you want. Start at the top left with the tool and then drag it down to the bottom right, and then click to confirm. If you want to adjust this, tab into edit mode or control tab it from the radial menu. Go into stroke select mode with 2 and then resize as needed. Go back into draw mode with tab and then select the white material, and we're going to draw a smaller oval for the glare. Tab into edit mode, select the eye, and let's Shift D to duplicate this to the other side. Now we're going to add the mouth. Tab into draw mode and select the arc tool and then the stroke material from up here. We're going to bump up the radius to around 50 or whatever looks good to you. Hit Y to select the mouth layer. Now this tool actually works from right to left, so just make 2 points in level between the eyes and you can control the curve by pulling down this blue dot. Now if you can't see your mouth when drawing, you can go to the Object Data Properties tab here and then go to Viewport Display and check in front. Then tab into edit mode and then make any adjustments. Now we have a face. We can also animate these eyes very easily. So while still in edit mode and then in front view, go down to the timeline and let's actually set this to 360 frames. Select the eye layer and then lock the mouth layer. Press the auto keying button, which looks like a recording button. Go up to frame 5 and while holding shift, select both the eyes, then S, then Z to scale this in, kind of like a blink. Duplicate the frames at 0 with Shift D and then put them at frame 10. I also want to add in between frames here, and we can do that with some quick interpolation. So put your playhead between the frames 0 and 5 and select this interpolate tool from the left. Let's drag to find a medium frame that could work. Great, so now we have this sequence here. If you want it automatically generated, you can delete that in between we just made, and with your cursor in the viewport, you can press Shift, Control, or Command E, and it'll bring up an interpolation sequence window here in the left. I'll change the steps to 3, and this means it'll create a frame every 3 frames. And notice that because it's between 0 and 5, it creates 1 frame for us, which is what we want. Then put your playhead in between the other range and you can do the same thing. We want this to repeat, so let's add a time offset modifier on it. Make sure Keep Loop is selected and check Custom Range. Let's make it from 0 to 30, and I kind of like a break in between the blinks. Then to influence, we're going to select only our eyes layer. If we play this in edit mode, it won't work now, but if we go into object mode, you'll see it happening. So our face is animated. Let's rename this object to face. Next, we're going to draw some rays emanating from the star. So let's add in another grease pencil blank and rename it rays. Then go to materials, click new, and check fill and select a light yellow color. Then we'll create a new layer, uncheck lights, and then rename this rays. Let's go into draw mode and make sure you're still in front view with numpad 1, and then your timeline playhead is at 0. So we're going to create these triangular shapes in between each point of the star. So with the box tool selected, let's create a box that's around 1.5 to 2 squares wide and then 3.5 squares tall. I'm just using our canvas as a guide. Click to confirm that, then tab into edit mode, and with vertex select mode with 1, let's select the vertices on the sides and delete them. Select the vertices at the top here and scale them in along the X into a triangle. Select all the points with A and scale or adjust if you'd like. Then in stroke select mode with 2, select the object and let's rotate this by 36 degrees with R and then entering 36. This is just the first ray out of 5. So let's duplicate this with Shift D and then R, then enter 72 to rotate it, and this is just 360 divided by 5. Hit Shift R 3 more times to get angled duplicates and then spread them out as needed. It's going to look messy, but you'll just need to move them a bit. So now I want to animate these so that they come out and then they come in. Go down into the timeline and then go to frame 10. Onion skins should automatically be on, but if they're not, you can just toggle them in the layers panel. Let's pull these rays out by grabbing them with G, and then duplicate the frames at 0 and then put them at 20. So now we have this choppy sequence and need those in-betweens. Going here between those two frames, I'm going to set a sequence with Shift Command or Control E like before, but set the steps to 4 to get 2 frames. And then I want to select those 2 frames and then move them back 1 so that they're directly in the middle of the sequence. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Now let's make this repeat with a time offset modifier. Again, check keep loop, custom range, and then start at 0 and then end at 20. We don't need to specify an influence since this will be on the entire object. Then go into object mode and it's repeating. So this is not the final step. We're going to want to add effects to this. So let's go into rendered preview mode because this is how we'll be able to see the effects in the viewport. Going into our effects panel, we're going to add a blur. This is going to soften up those edges, but also keep the definition of the rays that we created. I have samples at 16 and the size is around 150 for both the X and the Y. Then let's add a rim and arrange it on top of that blur effect. I'm making mine a warmish pink color, so adjust the offset if needed. Then bring in a glow effect and put this at the bottom of the stack. Samples to 16 as well, and then adjust the X and Y as needed. Pick any color that you want. For this, I'm picking a blue color. Lastly, let's go to our layers panel and take down the opacity to around 0.8, and now we have our rays. We actually want these rays to come out from behind our star, so go into object mode, go down into the timeline and make sure that auto keying is toggled off so we don't actually animate this movement. Push this object back in the Y with G and then Y. If you do get any glitching for these grease pencil objects, just make sure they're not too close together and their origins aren't overlapping. Let's also select our face grease pencil object and in the object data properties, unchecked in front in the viewport display. This is for animation purposes later on. Let's move this object forward in the Y. Alright, so this is the end of part 1. Check out part 2 next where we'll cover geometry nodes, background elements, and exporting.